Bank of Canada finally cutting its key lending rate today for the first time in 4 years, dropping the rate modestly from 5% to 4.75%, a 25 basis point cut. With Bank Governor Tiff Macklem making the call that post-pandemic runaway inflation will continue to calm closer and closer to the bank's 2% target. A decision coming as the Bank of England, European Central Bank, and U.S. Federal Reserve are all still holding their rates steady. In fact, Canada is the first country in the G7 to start cutting its key rate. Here to unpack why and what's to come is former Finance Minister John Manley. He's now the chair of Jefferies Securities and a senior advisor at Bennett Jones LLP. Hi, Mr. Manley. Great to see you. Thanks for making the time.
Not at all.
We heard a little bit from Mr. Macklem there, and I know from many of the economists I talked to in the lead up to this, they were very keenly listening to his messaging because of what happened just over a year ago when he said, I might press pause, and all of a sudden the housing market responded overwhelmingly. Do you think he struck the right tone in trying to quell that from happening a second time, or does the risk exist for that to happen again?
Well, I think he did. I think it's very important, though, for people to understand this is a very minor cut. It's 0.25 percentage point. This signals his confidence that things are moving in the right direction. Because remember, the bank has been under a lot of criticism, supposedly for moving too slowly to begin to raise rates. And so they undershot, and they don't want to overshoot going the other way because they don't want to have to reverse themselves. But I think all of the data that's been pouring in has justified this move. In other words, the economy has definitely slowed. Inflation is coming down closer to the range, even within the range, depending what numbers you're looking at. And I think we're also seeing employment being fairly cool. So it was the time to move. But, Vassy, home buyers should think carefully when they commit themselves to big mortgages. If they're doing it on the basis of 0.25 percentage point, they're pretty tight. So things can go the other way.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about, sort of what you think will inform future decisions. And in particular, to what degree do you think the situation in the U.S., where inflation has proven much harder to tame thanks to a very quickly growing economy, how might that impact the ability of the central bank here to cut rates more severely?
Well, I think there's going to be an impact because the U.S. economy is really roaring. And, that usually means that that's going to feed its way into our economy. We'll start to see things pick up. We'll see exports from Canada into the United States increasing. That's on the one hand, it's good for economic growth. It's good for job creation. It's good for all the things that we usually want. But it could also, give a nudge to those inflationary pressures. So I think they poured through the data on this very carefully. I think they expect the Fed in the U.S. to begin lowering rates, just not quite as soon. When you lower the Canadian rate, one of the things that we'll see happen in all likelihood is the Canadian dollar will also soften. Now, that doesn't really matter too much in the summer because we're actually producing a lot of our own food in the summer. Canadians aren't traveling to southern destinations in the summer, so no big deal. When we move into fall and winter, if the Canadian dollar goes down against the U.S. dollar, that actually is inflationary because so much of our produce comes in from the United States. Our oil, of course, is priced in U.S. dollars on world prices anyway, so that can also fuel inflation. So I think they're going to be very, very careful watching all of this data over the coming months before they move again. And I suspect the governor would like to see the Fed move before he moves again.
Interesting. Yeah, currency will be something to watch. A political question for you as my final one. If you were still finance minister, taking a step back, I get that this is one part of the economic story, but if you were looking writ large at the state of the economy right now, what would be keeping you up at night?
Our lack of competitiveness, our low productivity numbers, and the fact that we're just not growing. Royal Bank put out an excellent report yesterday that documents and highlights how much we've fallen behind in the last number of years, not just relative to the United States, because it's a very different kind of economy, which it's our close neighbor, of course, but we're lagging Australia, which is an economy very much like Canada. So I'd be thinking we got to figure out what we're needing to do here to attract investment, to increase investment, to improve productivity, and to grow the economy.
I think if I remember right, that report pointed out that over the past few decades, we've fallen from 6th in the OECD in productivity to something like 18th, to your point.
I think those are the right numbers, and that should be keeping the Minister of Finance up at night.
Okay, I'll leave it there. I won't keep you up this evening. Thanks, Mr. Manley. Great to see you as always. Appreciate your analysis.
Thanks, Vassy. Bye-bye.